Hello again. I'm down in the forest. It's early morning, and what a morning it is. Just look at this. I've got mist, I've got the sun rising, I've got the place to myself. I'm shooting with the big camera again, and I'm hoping to get some amazing shots as that light breaks through the trees. As I get into the woods, it's looking really interesting, because what we have today is like an algae blooming on the surface of the water. Seeing as it's summer, we're getting all sorts of growth coming through, and that's one of the things I like most about shooting in an area like this. You leave it a few weeks, and that's all it's been since I was last here, and it's totally transformed. I had ideas about the shots I wanted to take this morning, but they're just not the same as what I see behind me, which is great. I'm going to have to think differently, but that's the enjoyment of the seasons and the changes we get here in Britain. Now what I'm really trying to do here is find some compositions within the chaos of the growth that's taken place in the last month or so. It's blocking out most of the light at the moment because the sun's only just come up, and it's also difficult to differentiate between the different trees, so I need to press on a little bit further, I think, and try and find an area where there's a little bit more open water so I can actually identify my compositions and get something which is a bit clearer, a bit less cluttered. Well, I'll be honest, I'm going to have to admit defeat on this first location. I've been walking around now for probably the best part of an hour, up and down through the ferns, getting wet, trying to find something which caught my eye, and no matter how hard I tried, and I have tried, I've looked everywhere, I've looked up and down, around, been through various parts of the woods, nothing's grabbing me at the moment, so I think it's wise now that I actually move on and try somewhere else and get that enthusiasm back. I've got a lot more locations I know in Delamere Forest, so I'm going to give them a try. Well, in typical fashion, as I'm heading back to the car, I come out of the forest into a clearing and I find just the sort of material I'm actually after shooting. This small wetland area here with the trees and the mosses is glowing. It's absolutely beautiful this time of year. And I'm in the shade, so I've got the highlights under control as well. So I think I'll break out the camera and actually have a go at shooting this. That's great. I've made 2 frames on that particular shot. I've used Kodak Ektar and Kodak Portra. My settings on the camera, f/22, slight front tilt, 1 second for the Portra, 1 second for the Ektar, and 2 seconds for the Portra 400. It's quite an easy shot to set up really, and fingers crossed it comes out well. Well, I've driven all of a minute and I'm back down to an area I've shot before, but not for a few months. I think one of my earlier videos you may have seen me here in the mist and fog. It's quite a small area, there's only a couple of shots really, but there's a lot of growth this time of year, and just as the previous location, I have an awful lot of colour at the moment, and I'm going to make the most of that with my Ektar and Portra films. And one thing you need to watch out for if you come to Delamere or similar forests, although I believe this is quite unusual to Delamere, is a thing called a quaking bog. Now that's where the soil and all the growth goes over the edge of the water and it forms a thick raft. I don't know how thick actually it gets, but it does get to the point where the whole thing is actually moving underneath your feet. If you go too far, you could actually drop through if it's thin enough. So I tend to be quite cautious when I'm walking around here. You can actually feel how it gives way underneath your feet, so just a word of warning. Well, one thing I do with large format to save the struggle of manipulating it and trying to get a composition accurate in camera is to use a little compact camera. Now I used to have an LX5 Panasonic, which was fantastic for this because it had a little aspect ratio switch on the top of the lens, and also it stepped in 35mm full frame terms, 28, 35, 50, 85, and that matches my lenses. Now this isn't quite as good, this Sony RX100 Mark 1, but it gives me a good approximation, and that saves me a lot of time faffing about with the big camera, constantly readjusting it. Well, I've taken my shot now. I've used a wide angle lens on the Intrepid, 28mm equivalent. But I'll be honest, I think I miscalculated. The sun has come up considerably since I set up the shot, and I didn't notice it too much until I just took another reference shot with my little RX100 compact, and it's not as good as it looked earlier. There's too much contrast in the scene. So rather than shoot a safety shot, a second shot, I think I'll actually save that frame because it's about £5 a sheet, and I'll move on around the other side where the sun hasn't poked through yet. Another thing I've noticed this morning is the midges are out. They're absolutely driving me nuts as soon as I stop anywhere and try to set up, especially when I go underneath the dark cloth. They're all waiting for me and they're biting me to death. And I know it sounds trivial, but it doesn't half make you lose concentration. Well, after much thrashing through the undergrowth, I've managed to get where I intended to be. But sadly, the sun is starting to poke through in the background, and that creates a real problem. Far too much contrast. I'm moaning because this time the sun's out. Last time I moaned because there wasn't any sun. Yeah, no pleasing me, but there you go. I do know a location though, and if you watched my earlier video on pinholing, you'll recall that I went to an area which was very deep and dark, and I think that'll work today. If the sun manages to poke through in a few areas, that could be fantastic, and I'm thinking black and white this time as well. You know I was going on about quaking bogs before. Well, I've just crossed one, I think. And it stinks as well. Absolutely awful pong. I think I've released all sorts of methane, so I'm stuck with that for the rest of the morning now. Thank you, Delamere. But I am happy to report I've located the area I was in last time. That's because I marked it on Google Maps, thankfully. And this is what it's looking like today. I have got light poking through in places. Now the tricky thing is how to make something of this, otherwise it'll just look random and confusing. So I need to simplify it and get a really, really simple bunch of shapes with a bit of light just showing off some of the trees. Well, I've been set up for a while now. I've got a 300mm lens on, which is equivalent to about 85mm. And I've focused in on a beautiful little tree there, which was backlit when I started to set the camera up. Now it takes so long to set this thing up, focus it, get all the movements just right, get it all stopped down, ready to shoot. The light had gone. So I've got a choice now. I can either wait for the light to come back, or I can go and shoot something else and maybe face the same problem. So I think I'll actually give it a bit of time. Sun's moving all the time, should come out, pick out the leaves again. Got black and white in, also might give it a shot in colour, it's that pretty. Well, it turns out that was my last shot of the day. I have wandered around for a couple of hours more, but you know, nothing's grabbed my eye and I'm not wasting film. I'll be back another day though. I've found some interesting new spots, just need the right conditions. So I hope you've enjoyed it and see you again soon.